Am I audible? Cool. Since this is recorded, my mom, I'm sorry if you're watching this. Starting with speech in 3, 2, 1. When your parents gave birth to you because they are not financially ready, simply because your grandparents are asking for you, simply because your neighbors are basically asking when they're going to get married, when they're going to be having children, we believe that you also have the rights to be constituted by the state, for the state to basically help your parents in raising you. But on the kind of mechanism as well as the timeline on how this motion is going to look like, notice that this is going to be done in the most gentle manner. There is to say from you're born, you're going to be raised by your parents, but this at the end of the day, this motion will basically start from the moment and even before these children were born. There is to say that the government will instill values to the parents. They are going to be educating their parents on how to basically raise their children properly. They are going to be giving heavy financial incentive towards these parents so that they will be able to basically supply the needs of these children. But second of all, on the second timeline, right, when you have been born, this is at the end of the day, you are going to be subjected towards the government's education. There are going to be government agents that are going to be coming from your towards your parents. But at the end of the day, they are also going to be basically assessing the way your parents are going to be raising you, the way they are going to be educating you, the way the values they are going to be instilling you, and the way they're going to be providing to you as a children, and basically provides them with education and money. But then, why is this going to be likely under our side of the house? Notice that this is going to be the most common extension, because at the end of the day, the fate of the state are going to be determined by the qualities of the generation that are going to be continuing towards the parents, right? There is to say that at the end of the day, these children are going to be the politicians, these children are going to be the technicians, these children are going to be the building blocks and the building foundations of these countries. That is why they are going to have to try to provide you with as best education as they can, to basically try to assess your talents and basically give you education in which you are going to be able to thrive with the talents that you are going to have. But at the end of the day, even if, for example, the opposition will argue that this is not going to be done in a gentle way, we will say that this is still going to be principally correct. Notice that the comparative on opening of positions that they will have to face is essentially raising a children based on their arbitrary values. There is to say having coercion from family based on what education you will have. There is to say your grandparents might be forcing you to become a doctor, although you might have incentive to become politicians, although you might have incentive to become a debater, for example. Notice that this also means that there is going to be baseless education from their peers that basically listen to pressure on how these parents are going to be supposed to be raising their children. At the very least, notice that at the end of the day, we are going to be giving agency towards the parents necessarily to basically raise their children on how the government runs it and how the government basically will give the best towards these children. But yes, closing opposition.
Why do you think children is responsible towards the interest of a state rather than the interest of their parents?
Notice that at the end of the day, since this state will basically have much more incentive, they will have much more capitals, they will have much more access towards people who comprehend the values in which the children are going to be raised in. It is still going to be within the benefits of them, it is still going to be within the incentive of the children to be raised by the state rather than being raised by the parents who don't necessarily be able to comprehend what these children need, for example. Notice then that at the end of the day, this kinds of extension essentially means that there is going to be highly likelihood for the parents under your side of the house to essentially cater to what your grandparents means for example, or towards what your peers or their peers basically want from your parents. This is going to be bad. Why is this the case? Two reasons. One, there is going to be a high likelihood that they're going to be raising you based on the external incentive that at the end of the day, people who don't necessarily comprehend what you need will basically be telling these parents. But second of all, there is also going to be a reasoning in which these parents are going to not be able to comprehend themselves on how to basically tackle all these kinds of information that they are going to be coming from the people that are going to be conveying them. But then on the principal level, why is this going to be correct? Notice that what we will have to protect are the people that are going to be the most vulnerable. That is the children. Why is this the case? Two reasons. First of all, children doesn't necessarily consent to be born. That is to say, you do not consent to the world in which you are going to be born in. You do not necessarily consent to your parents giving birth to you, although they might not be ready for marriage yet, although they might not be ready to raise you yet. But second of all, at the end of the day, this is also important. Why is this going to be the case? Because at the end of the day, notice that since you do not necessarily have consent to be born, there is also going to be a high likelihood that whatever you are going to be doing, whatever you are going to be raised as, will basically be determined by your parents at the end of the day. Notice that this is going to be important on two principal level. First, there is going to be a symmetry of power between the parents and the children. That is to say, even if, for example, the children are going to not want to be subjected into certain kinds of education or certain kinds of discipline, then there is going to be still high likelihood that at the end of the day, the parents will still force them to do so. The parents are still going to be, for example, cutting off the amount of food that they're going to be giving, the amount of monthly allowance that they're going to be giving towards their children. But why is this not going to be done under our side of the house? Notice, because at the end of the day, first of all, this is going to be the government that are going to be giving them. These are going to be professionals. And notice that these children will basically understand that this is going to be the case. There is going to be an internal incentive for the children to essentially try to follow the professionals, right? To essentially try to follow people who necessarily understand about them. But notice then, at the end of the day, even if, for example, the children still doesn't want to follow the professionals, even if, for example, you still have a talent in becoming a debater, for example, but then the professionals told you to become a doctor, notice that there is still going to be a way around this. Notice, because the professionals comprehend and are able to be subjected to every single option that is going to be existing within the status quo, they can basically try to compromise with your ideas, with what you want, and what with the state needs. That is to say that they can still subject you into education that are going to be based on logic and facts, for example, such as becoming a scientist, becoming a professional programmer, and things like that. Notice then that second of all, why parents are inherently going to be bad under the current status quo. First of all, we have already told you that at the end of the day, they're going to be subjected into much more simpler arbitrary values under their side of the house. But second of all, that at the end of the day, there is still going to be internal factors for the parents to essentially try not to be coerced by their children. That is to say, the parents understand that their powers in which they stem from will basically come from the children understanding of the power asymmetry that is going to be happening to them. This essentially means that at the end of the day, the parents will definitely resort to heavy-handed tactics, for example, by simply threatening the children, for example. Why is this going to be bad? Notice that under our side of the house, this case is not going to be happening because the state will necessarily understand what the values that these parents need. So what is going to be the weighing here? The weighing is simple. And on the comparative, that at the end of the day, we are going to be protecting the most vulnerable actors. That is to say, the children that does not consent to be born. That is to say, the children that does not have any say in the current status quo. But at the end of the day, what the opposition side of the house will have to protect then is why then under their side of the house, the capabilities of the children will still be there to basically determine their own fate, why also the parents will still have the capabilities to raise them based on what these children want best. This is why we are proud to propose. Boleh ditinggiin nggak? Tes. Ah. Oh ya. Tes. Aman. Oke. Oke. PI preferably from closing, might take it at minute 5. Just refer me as leader of opposition. I think government case already lose when they use their fiat as saying that, oh, the mechanism that we want is still gonna raised by the parents, but the government have the value for this particular children.
spoiler alert, this is status quo, not the motion at all. The motion specifically said that have a whole complete control for the government. This is where OG fails to mechanize what is the importance of the complete government. That is why they're already lost. But let's engage to their case, right? I think that the way that they frame this this debate, they assume that, oh yeah, when you are raised by the government, all of the asymmetry power will likely to gone. Spoiler alert, they didn't really mechanize and didn't really illustrate how they were likely to still give agency. They told about, oh, they still want to follow the professional. This means they don't give certain points of agency towards the children anyway, right? This is where they don't give agency, they don't fix the issue of asymmetry of power in their side of the house also. But I think secondly, when they say about, oh, threatening, etc., I don't think they understand regarding parenting. There is still a unique thing called about genuinity, still a unique thing about emotional bonding that makes all of those particular threatening is also that not that harmful and like not, it's always going to be moderate because exactly the narrative of their parents, right? Few set up to make this debate clear because OG clearly failed to do so. First things first, what is the likelihood of like the government interest that we are talking about? Well, firstly, they will likely to become more objective, like they want to say they want to instill more good HR in the future. This looks like, for instance, how government will not see these children as human being, but rather seen as an asset, right? For instance, how government want them to contribute for the country, how government want to have like the value of like Bhinneka Tunggal Ika. This is also limits their agency as the children, right? But I think secondly, in terms of how they will likely to treat them with a certain standard, for instance, they want to like instill a value, a manual, etc. This is like a standard, like this is like how everyone will have the same schooling, how everyone will have the same treatment to actually raise the child, right? We said this is incredibly harmful, but I will explain it later. But I think secondly, in terms of government want to like instill their value of like stability, this means you will likely to have a certain degree of value they will teach. We say this is incredibly bad. Why then this is problematic? Two structural reasons. One, we told you this is bad for a children with special needs because you cannot generalize how every children is actually the same. There is a spectrum of children. For instance, there's a neurodivergent children. There is a children with special needs, right? Under outside the house, they cannot access this particular special needs because if they does, then what's the delta of this particular debate, right? We say under outside the house, we provide them more avenue to actually teach the children better. But I think secondly, they don't have the fiat to have make genuine connection because how government operate is in a base of pragmatism, right? At best, if they want to like make a good connection, it's only going to be like the children that can only give back. There's also a prerequisite for you to get good treatment under their side of the house, right? Under outside the house, we make the parent genuinely love. What is the delta from opening opposition? I think under outside the house, the parents will still have some control over the children, but the government also still helps, right? Because we also think that the government needs to help, right? For instance, about how they still will stay in their parents' home until adult, right? They still help within the value, they still help within the funding and the schooling within etc., right? But I think secondly, how government will play under outside the house, government will still help in terms of like affirmative action, providing schooling, education for the parents to actually enhance the degree of the parenting, right? But all the final calls, for instance, like raising the children, schooling, having the authority for the parents, we will still all of the things is going to be for the child. Later, we will prove you why this is better. The framing here, the principle should be disregarded, like OG want to say, because just a simple fact, borning a children is also a breach of a principle for the children, right? What matters in this debate is how the well-being of the children in the first place, right? Let's flip the case of opening government. When they say like, oh yeah, how parents are doctrine and limits the agency of the children because of their asymmetry power. Few responses to this. One, this is not true because how parents, in the average, parents love them. How does this look like? How they genuinely love them. This means that even if there's an abuse, this will likely to become a moderate way or like in a good intention. But I think secondly, they will likely to accept you for who you are, right? Even if you are disagree. For instance, when you are a parent, you have a neurodivergent child, right? You will likely to like have a time to actually accept this, but you will likely to have this particular thing, right? This is why we still have this under outside the house. But I think thirdly, how they will provide everything for their parents, they won't like it to abuse in the first place. There's also mechanism like check and balance still happening under outside the house, right? The argument that I'm going to bring is talking about how the well-being of the children and the happiness of the children will likely to become better under outside the house. What is the process? We can see that all parents have different capacity to actually raise the children, but we think that it still makes your you can still have to some degree to make your children happy and well-being. How does this look like? Because the degree of happiness of these children can still be adjustable. For instance, their standard of how it's going to look like. Two things. One, for instance, is how because the children are habituated, the standard of happiness will be personally adjusted to their family condition. This looks like how a poorer child, maybe just like buying KFC is enough to make them happy, right? This is where the degree of happiness will still going to be happen under outside the house. But I think secondly, even if when government say there's a social media, the society that make the children irrational in the first place, I think that parents had children have the rationality to actually filter it and how the algorithm is specified to their financial choice, right? They can still choose what they want to need, right? This is where the conclusion being the children can only be happy under outside the house and even better when you are personalized with your children, right? The comparative on government is worse. Why? Because the metric of happiness is generalized in their side of the house. Because government want to make it as efficient as possible. This was like, the most likely scenario is only a bare minimum. Secondly, even it's fulfilling, it's not going to be for all, right? Why is it incredibly harmful? We told you how is the well-being of the happiness of the children is hampered on their side because exactly it's generalized. For instance, how it's harmful for the children because they cannot be happy, they cannot maximize for the potential. We told you how neurodivergent children cannot get those particular help, etc. Right? Secondly, when you can be maximized, the people of like society, when you want to explore, the government will likely to condemn you in the first place, right? Under outside the house, it is not perfect, but at least it was better, right? The weighing is three things. One, we told you in terms of vulnerability, we told you how all of these particular children of like who are the most vulnerable will get the treatment better under outside the house. We told you how government have incentive to actually make those particular mechanism in the first place. Secondly, in terms of scale, our benefit not only talking about the bare minimum, but we enhance all of this particular regarded under outside the house. We make it better because exactly it is personalized. But I think thirdly, in terms of like the parents of like doctrinized, etc., I don't think it's that moderate anyway, and I think there's a lot of mechanism how I told you government can still help to educate the parents. We say it is much better under the house. So proud to oppose.
I think. All right. Is this great? Okay. I think this is great. Okay. Opening opposition clearly only operates under the best case. They assume that every parent loved and every parent actually consented into having these kids, never once considering there are so many kids born under such unfortunate circumstances that they are not wanted in the first place. Several justifications that government wants to bring into this debate is that, firstly, why exactly does the government is justified enough in the first place to do this complete control over the child rearing? Firstly, we've seen so many cases in child neglect. You have middle to low suffer cases in which my first speaker has mechanized on how government will be actively involved even before they were born by giving many mandatory education towards the parents. But on extreme cases, that the government cannot preemptively take measures like trigger warning, like unwanted pregnancies, or the kids that are born in such horrifying or such inherently toxic household, whether their parents could be drug users or alcohol abusing, we basically it's justified to take them away in these extreme measures for the sake of the safety and their initial well-being in the first place. As opening government, we've proven to you how this will be only exclusive under their house, and even if closing government tried to cover one cases or not, OG has covered both. Moving on. These kids lack agencies in comparison to these parents. You have to acknowledge these panels because due to the sense of belonging that the parents has, government is ultimately more neutral in so many ways because they have to cater to so many kids. Like no internalized intentions that any parents could have, and this is the direct preemptive towards opposition on why we believe it is better to not fulfill the parents' interests. Because even if parents are good or genuinely love their kids, there are still so many cases that our parents can still be infatuated by their echo chamber of people around them. There are so many values and so many ideas that these parents might not inherently have in the first place, but they could be conceived by this. They have to fulfill how the society wants their kids to be, and maybe they they initially don't want to push their kids to become like doctors, to become law enforcement, but due to how the society has perceived how someone could be successful in the future, these parents might, in the first place, are actually loving and want to follow their kids' interest. They could be, no, thank you, later. They could be influenced into pushing these kids into making big decisions that would actually control them over their life. Second justification, why the government won't mess up even in all cases. Firstly, they have the incentives to do their best in making sure that these children that are under their control, right, will become, firstly, the best version of themselves. This is why opening opposition, we clearly say that this dismissed our whole point that the government, no matter how many interests that they have over these kids, will firstly prioritize their interests. And it is something that the parents cannot fulfill at so many ways, because now the government is neutral. They can, even with same school, with same treatments, the way that the government will mechanize this is that because they want the best. They want the best generations. Because government in its nature are hanging so desperately into these kids for the future of their country. So they won't, just do whatever they want into these kids. They won't take their agencies. They will pick up what are the best. Like if these kids could be the best athletes, they have, they have interest over sports, then push them towards better athletes, send them into Olympics, let them do what they love, what they're best at. If these kids are good at arts is very, very, very has lack values in so many parents' eyes. This is not generalizing, but just in so many cases, kids who love arts are, forced to diminish their values over how they see art and are chosen to pursue other career. We're in government because, we want these kids to become better. We don't want to, put aside their dreams. We don't want to put aside their values over life. We want them to create, again, the golden generation that the government ultimately needs. All the interest that these kids has that the parents cannot fulfill in the first place will only happen under our side of the house. Secondly, some kids doesn't have to deal, some kids unfortunately have to deal with their protection being violated. And this is what so many parents also cannot guarantee in the first place. Like you cannot always supervise your kids, but with government, they have so many resources to help these kids. So very basic rights that are oftentimes left is only covered under government side. Thirdly, you don't have to deal with consequences of not being able to choose to be born in a harmful situation. Our biggest problem here is that these kids are born under arbitrary situation. They didn't be able to choose their parents, I'm sorry to bring this up, but in a very, very poor household that where parents cannot fulfill their basic needs, we say that the government is very justified to get into the complete control over these kids. Thirdly, even, parents are also limited in many ways. We don't want to say that parents is not capable of raising their kids. There are so many conditions that cannot be predicted in the first place. Maybe you have enough money when you have these kids, when your wife is pregnant or when you are pregnant, you have, the resources in the first hand. But what if you get layoffs? What if there are certain unfortunate events that you cannot predict in the first hand happen towards your family? All right, go on.
Even if government have more money, but you need to divide it with all of the kids within the states, right? This means the degree of money is not that much anyway. How can you provide that?
All right, I will give you justification over why resources matter. But going back to my point, these parents we don't say that these parents have enough capabilities, but there are so many, again, unpredictable reasons on why they cannot fulfill their child needs, not because they want to, but they are forced into the situation. Why exactly does resources of government matter? Because firstly, they are able to fulfill so many things that the parents cannot, like, things that we parents consider not important, such as mental health, because this government has enough resources of psychiatrists, has enough resources towards psychology, kids' psychological help. Secondly, all the interest development of these kids that will push them towards the betterment of themselves, the betterment of their images, the betterment of their future, and exactly the betterment of this country as well. Thirdly, the very basic of proper education. You have to acknowledge opposition that so many parents doesn't have the agency to send their kids into great schools. And even if government doesn't have the very, very great school to send all of these kids, at least we gave them the proper and the same amount for every kid. And then later on, like try to find what are the best interests, what are the best talents, and help them in pursuing their best life in a very sorry condition that not many parents are able to. Very proud to propose.
Am I audible? All right. PI from closing. I'll be taking 1 in 5. Oh, sorry, can I take an I think OG lose because they characterize to you that state is likely going to be objective and only going to cater to the interests of the children. Meanwhile, Arya clearly characterized to you that government are rigid and opportunistic and they only want to cater to their own interests, which is to maximize the interests of the state, maximizing their productivity in terms of using the children in the end. This is not going to come in the form of child labor, but simply by making the children to go for things like the social sciences or math in the first place. We think it is harmful because it limits the ability for the children to explore on their side of the house. Which means that there are 2 issues in this debate. Firstly, in terms of the relationship with the parent, and secondly, also question implementation on their side of the house, right? And I'm going to accent to you why the word on opposition on government is going to kill the incentive and fulfillment for the children itself. I like to characterize that the agency for children on both sides is already violated, and the only way for you to maximize the children already born in this first place is by giving them the ability for them to have fulfillment because they're already born in this world, right? First issue, in terms of implementation, because OG poses that the profession is simply going to cater to children's needs, and for example, people are going to like the state is going to be objective and cater to these people. We think this is not true, because the government on their side is likely to have this kind of state agent, like they clearly told you, which means that even if they're children who are likely to consult to the professionals, they're going to assert, or for example, they're going to diverse these children's chances. If they actually want to opt for art, for example, they're going to tell you that it's not beneficial for the state, which means that you're likely to also go for things like social sciences instead. Which means that the ability or the perspective of people of trying to say that social sciences is the this is the thing that is likely to be beneficial for the country, it's going to be even more prominent on their side of the house, right? But B, comparative on our side, when the parents see you as a children, they're more likely to want to, for example, cater to you, which exactly because three structural reasons. A, the fact that you're biological, the fact that you have blood ties, which means their interest is yours interest, but secondly, the fact that they're able to empathize to you when they actually have a direct emotional needs, that, for example, emotional ties, when they open up to you, for example. But lastly, the fact that they see you as your mini version, which means there's incentive for parents to want the children not want to suffer as much as as them in the first place, which means on our side, you still have incentive for parents to want to listen to their children. On their side, you like to maximize the characterization interest of the children. This is why it's very harmful on their side of the house. But lastly, within that, now in the status quo, if they want to talk about mental health, but then it's less likely to happen on their side. Example, a state feel that's something that's tangible to them. If they see the children is still doing well in school, they don't know if the kid is depressed or not, right? This is why there's less incentive for people to check on these children, exactly because they feel that they're still functioning anyways, therefore there's no urgency to want to cater to mental health on their side of the house. But secondly, within that, on our side comparatively, the fact that these parents are able to notice all the small things that's different when the children come back from home because they're being bullied, this is why when you create these emotional needs for these children or these emotional ties, this is why it's very important on our side of the house for the parents to be aware of this mental health. And the fact that status quo is progressing, right? Children, parents or society now already make awareness about mental health in the first place. This is why we say the status quo is already enough. So this is why the implementation on government is likely to be bad, and it's not. It's like the status quo is going to be enough. Secondly, on the relationship with parents, right? Because they tell you that most likely these parents are their power asymmetry, and there's also, for example, like pressure for parents to have children that is out of consent. But I'd like to, as Arya pointed out to you, right? The fact that these parents are more likely. Like these parents still have incentive to be good for the children, exactly because A, there is check and balance coming from family or friend, for example, if they call out if the parents are being abusive or being neglected in the first place, which means that on our side of the house, there are other people who are still taking care of children, for example, the teachers in school, for example, or your neighbors simply are able to also call this out on our side of the house, which means that the government doesn't necessarily need to opt and take these children from these parents, or for example, doesn't need for the parent, for the children to be like the parents to be taught on how they educate the children, right? But lastly, the fact that on our side of the house, they're also afraid of things like law punishment, like child services, for example, child policy that exists on our side of the house. This means that there's actually check and balance for the children in the first place, right? But secondly, if they think that neglect and abuse happen because children are brought up out of consent parents, the fact that there's already policy, like we told you, that provide basic healthcare and education, this means that even if you are having a children, the bare minimum is able to sustain the children in the first place, like they don't have as much suffering on our side of the house, which means that it's already enough. But B, we think that abandonment is going to happen even more on their side. It's because on their side, if children are seen as having no value to the state, which means that, for example, kids there's neurodivergent, for example, who's unable to study as well, disabled children, for example, who are seen as complex problems that's unable to be solved simply by parents, is going to be abandoned on their side of the house simply because they think that it is something that they cannot invest anything into, which means that on their side of the house, it's very hard for these children
from OG
to be able to be to be able to be catered to. Which when the honors comparatively, there's counter narrative from the society to think that, oh, people with Down syndrome, for example, are seen as a gift from God, which means that you need to, for example, like cater to these children in the first place. And second, there are community from parents who have disabled children, for example, who's likely to check and balance and want to take care on our side. The fact that this already exists in status quo, which means that we don't need government to actually interfere with this. Yes.
The harms from your side is going to be much harsher because you're going to be contingent on the parents that doesn't necessarily have any sort of internal incentive as opposed to the government that basically has all the incentive in the world.
We clearly told you that there's a most incentive for the parents because there's law that prevents them if they actually don't take care of children. But secondly, the fact that there's also check and balance and call out that we told you, you don't listen to my speech at all. This is why we said it's worse on their side of the house for children who are born out of consent, because now they're able to simply shift this to the government and say that, oh, this is how the government taught me to teach my children to. This is why on their side of the house, if they only do the bare minimum, they simply can get away with it simply because they already assert or they already comply with the government regulation, which we think that is harsh because it makes the children only want to use, can only be used to maximize the productivity of the state in the first place, right? So lastly, on my extension, what do you think that this skills incentive and fulfillment for children? We would like to posit that on your side, on their side, when you impose a standard on how to raise a child, you're seen like something, you're going to be treated as something that's only be beneficial for the state. This means that they're going to limit child's exploration. It looks like you don't let them explore things like interests, hobbies, all those kind of things. It's not going to be explored on their side because this is something that is not beneficial. Because on their side, if they want to do things like music, for example, they don't have the resources, but the fact that resources is going to be allocated to things that state think is something that's beneficial for them. This means that fundings like tuition courses will only be allocated to things like math and social sciences and not to art and music like their side because they're seeing something that less tangible. But lastly, the fact that children are going to be seen only as an asset that only affect, for example, for the productivity of children, of the state, which means that comparative on our side is that you have the interest for the parents to want their children to be successful, but even if not, there already existing mechanisms to make sure that they're able to maintain children. Going here is that one, on scale, we are able to apply this to all children, even if they're able to, for example, not neglect children, the small, it's only going to be minority, only for the smart people proud to oppose.
Just to make it clear that under closing government side of the house, we will take the full control of the children itself. Means under our side of the house, the delta is that we are not only giving the subsidies towards the children, but also try to taking care, we also sacrifice the right of the parents to control these children at the very first place. And also under our side of the house, it doesn't mean we are as a government is just being stupid and not using the professional itself. Under our side of the house, we will use professional like psychology and also educator to ensure that these children having the maximize their capacity. This is also prevent their argumentation that saying that, oh, you only prioritize certain of children, not disabled or person that have special needs. Understand that the interest of government itself is to maximize their investment, and also understand that government interest also to ensure that at the end of the day, these kids are usable to country itself. Does it mean we will not simply for example, put all of them in the same job, but also make sure that they fulfill all the potential job that currently exists. So under our side of the house, we also looking and taking care towards their own interest on also their capacity, for example, because we don't want to create useless investment at the very first place, right? But also second of all, exactly because government interest is that they wanted to keep their power, ladies and gentlemen, they need to ensure that at the end of the day, other parents, for example, that get discriminated under their assumptions is not doing a protest at all. So that's why under our side of the house, we will ensure that's not happen at the very first place, right? But this debate in opening very deadlock, because in government assume that basically government is perfect, but and then in opposition assumes that parents is perfect, ladies and gentlemen. To break the deadlock, we need to take in the very worst scenario, if the actor that we need to defend is bad, why it's still completely fine. First of all, let's talk about the bad government, right? Which will be happen in both of sides. In cases, for example, in North Korean, exactly bad government basically a bad government, it's better for you to follow government and your children taking care by the government. Why? Because at the end of the day, at least, even though your kid use for maximize the interest of the government at the very first place, but at the end of the day, government ensure their basic needs, ensure that they have job, ladies and gentlemen. Comparatively on their side of the house, if they live in North Korea and you do not want to, for example, follow the agenda of government, exactly your kids will be always getting violence or using or become a second class of society, exactly because your kids at the end of the day do not use for government at the very first place, ladies and gentlemen. That's the reasons, in order to defend these cases of bad government, exactly better under our side. Because right now, government is the one who can control and taking care all of the things of these kids at the very first place, right? But exactly on their side of the house, why parents is getting worse? Because at the end of the day, parents use their emotion, ladies and gentlemen, on deciding something. The bad parents on their side of the house will use the idea of religions or their own interest, for example, to maximize their children. The problem with this, there is no practical benefit that you can create the matrix or clear impact. That's why on their side of the house, bad parents would be worse rather than bad government, because you cannot ensure such as a basic needs or basic things that you really need to provide to the kids at the very first place, because they only prioritize their emotional, for example. But even if we take it at their base about perfect parents, for example, this is going to, it's still bad, because at the end of the day, the decisions of parents itself still based on the emotional comparatively to the parent. That doesn't mean on your side of the house, parents will likely to simply lose their confidence on creating certain things for the children the moment when they face problem, ladies and gentlemen. The moment, for example, it's something really hard and they see the children need to go to a very bad process in order to achieve it, they will simply say that, oh, you do not need to suffer yourself, I'll be taking care of anything, and at the end of the day, the kids will have no progress and process, because the kids will never take it the cases of process themselves, ladies and gentlemen, and being better, right? That's the reasons why in closing government, we provide better analysis why government better. Yes.
Sorry. Your case is contradictory, because you want to say that government have the incentive to explore, but you want to say government have the incentive to instill power. Power can only uphold with a unified standard, and that is why our harm still stands.
That's why I mentioned to you that the worst case scenario, which is, yeah, that's clear, right? But second of all, let's talk about the fundamental right. This is really important, because none of them that exactly explain why at the end of the day you can sacrifice right of parents and you need to prioritize right of kids. Understand that the first right that we need to maintain is that the fundamental right, the rights that at the end of the day comes you as a human being, because you are born at the very first place, right? This is right, for example, not access. The fundamental right of parents is having kids, because this is natural process of human being to having a kids at the end of the day. But the fundamental right is not to taking care, because at the end of the day, we talk about someone else's right, ladies and gentlemen. That's why we can sacrifice the right of parent itself. But what the difference of kids? Kids' fundamental right is that self-defense. That's why in cases of war, for example, you need to ensure your enemy and war also having a weapons and capacity to defend themselves, because we globally understand that the fundamental of right is self-defense. In these cases, you cannot ensure the fundamental right of self-defense exists on their side of the house the moment when parents have so many flaws, such as economic things, such as the capacity of become good parents and also economic side, right? That's the reason government better, because government can create self-defense towards these kids itself, because government have the incentive to ensure that the investment is good, and also government have the capacity to doing so. That's the reasons under our side of the house, exactly the rights that we need to protect is the kids itself, because that's the fundamental right of the kids, right? But moreover, what you need to understand that on our side of the house, the best government will at the end of the day creating sustainability progress in the country itself, because right now government have more data, more capacity to allocate them. On their side of the house, they never defend the cases of how many employment that happen in current status quo, how many kids, for example, do not get job itself because of lack of education, because of their only priorities, their irrationality, for example, and the interest of parents at the very first place. That's the reason it's getting worse and worse on their side of the house in terms of how you creating sustainability. That's why under our side we ensure it to be more sustainable rather than the best parents that they argue, because it only works based on emotional. Even that's love and many version of you, it's still bad. We are very proud to propose.
Tes. I don't know how to say this warning, but my speech will be quite emotional. So yeah, please bear with me. And Mom, Dad, I love you. Exactly like CG said, notice that this debate is not about which stakeholders can be objective like an angel. Because we say government also has subjective interest, right? First, not only in the fulfillment of jobs that a nation or state needs, not only does their proposal creates limitations of education, hobbies, or job interests that will happen in their side, but also in terms of values and ideology, because exactly countries like North Korea exist, conservative country like Indonesia exists, so therefore there is a preferred values and ideology that is becoming the interest of a certain nation, so therefore it's just the same. But make no mistake, panels, because to protect children's agency, we cannot always rationalize their choices over a consideration of communal benefits, for example, or even long-term benefits for their individual self, meaning which interest, subjective interest is better for these children. This is, I'll say an example. For example, when I was a kid, I want to become an astronaut just because it's cool. And my dad, at the end of the day, still buys me an astronaut helmet, even if he knows that I'm not going to be one. And for me, that is more than enough. Few responses towards the opening, the government case. The opening government says that government intervention happens in their side. Only kinds of intervention, but we say, and also OO did a great job in contextualizing this, that there is already such mechanism, similar mechanism in the status quo, and we say their mechanism is weak because first, it is lack of supervision from the government, and secondly, simply because of that, their practical benefits won't fly at the end of the day. But secondly, when they say that government has incentive to know what children needs through the professional agents, we say that first, no emotional attachment and engagement is at the end of the day harmful, but secondly, bias towards the needs of the state, which in this case the professional engagement itself, is also harmful. But thirdly, when they say like government won't mess up, but at their very best case, we say that they won't mess up fulfilling the government own needs, and this is not a metric that serves the interest of the children. All the other rebuttal towards their case and the case of closing government will intertwine in my points of arguments. So, first point of arguments, how parents determining method of children rearing. Like we say that the problem in today's status quo is that there is a diverse type of family, right? Different, coming from different cultural background, economic economic background and different preference of ideological background, for example. Meaning there are diverse conditions of children facing different problems. And we say it is attached to a different culture in a state of different economy and holds different ideology. We say creating only one type of child rearing done by only one actor overgeneralize this diversity. Therefore, we kind of opposes this. So why parents are the one who objectively who have the right to determine method of children rearing? Because we say parents not only have better emotional attachment but also relates better towards the children itself. Let's talk about emotional attachment. This is important because children, notice, are emotional being. We say that choices they made is not based off rational cost benefits analysis. Children relates to emotional approach. First, they want to become an astronaut, for example, because they think it is awesome, or they interact with their friends because of the shared identity. And we say this emotional attachment and emotional engagement, even if to some point it is brainwashed, we say it's okay because it at least gives contributions of these children's meaning in life, for example. And we say that's okay. And at the very least, parents are the one who are justified to do this because they know it better. But not only does emotional attachment plays a role in here, because parents also have a high portion of rationality because they can relate to children simply because they are living in the same condition as their children. Meaning parents know what the problems the children will face in the future. For example, they know it is going to hard to find jobs for a family like them, and etc., etc. But even if you say you don't buy this characteristic because you know like the government does it better, but we say it is better in our side because framing children's problem is not only future problems. Their problems includes the heart of expression, for example, or the finding identity or meaning in life. And parents can approach these problems better because of that emotional attachment and relates to living in the same condition as the children does. Even if at the very at our worst condition parents are using religion approach or certain values in order to approach this, we say that is very, very okay, ladies and gentlemen, because at the very least children know that it is valuable to them and it is okay for you to be emotional. And the aim point of parenting is protection. Therefore, we are giving you protection of these children's agency. But moving on to my second argument, and how diverse child rearing better accommodate the needs of the children itself. We say that children doesn't relate to their own state. For example, they have no emotional connection first, and at the end of the day, they have less communication towards the state itself. Meaning, children doesn't understand the meaning of their participation, their agency, of their contribution towards the state. At their best scenario, at the end of the day, children is suffering. This is the point that none of the teams are talking about. Example, when I was a kid, I don't care about the economic crisis Indonesia have or will face in the future, right? But at the very least, I understand the economic struggle my parents have. Meaning, at the very least, in our worst scenario, children can put meaning to their contributions towards their parent needs, even if it's through many kinds of values, such as religious values, and etc., etc. At the very least, we say in status quo, there is an alternative when you want to express a certain values or when you want to uphold a certain religion, because you can always choose that when you are becoming an adult, right? At the end of the day, why we think that it is better in our side, preempt to the dictation or brainwash points that they're going to say, we say in our side communication exists and it is going really great and progressive. We say parents relates, second reason, two reasons. First, parents relates to the struggle that the children face, right? And secondly, parents also exposed towards the life of the children. They know where their children go, going to which schools and which hobbies does they have, and etc., etc. Even if they don't share the same values, they can compromise, they can understand. Mom, I love you for like giving me the agency to join a debate team, even if you know you are very conservative, and etc., etc. At the end of the day, you want to hear my story about the liberal values that I got from a debating competition. Therefore, children identity is dynamic and adaptation matters. Parents are the only one who can do that. Very proud to oppose. Thank you.
yeah.
Check, check. Is it clear? Okay. In opening and in opposition bench, they defend on parents that's really perfect in the status quo based on the emotional approachment that government doesn't have, and then through this emotional approachment, we can have more or better protection to the children. The fact that parents are not responsible to the children that coming from broken family, or maybe they are not having a good economy. I think emotional approachment is also not the solution for this kind of children to get a parenting, ladies and gentlemen. So I think emotional approachment is not something that really needed, because under government it's also happened. I'm going to explain about this. Under government side of the house, even if we subjective as a government, we have a good consideration at least in practical benefit that going to beneficial to these children, ladies and gentlemen. In government, when closing opposition also worry about these children, not teach about something that very variative when they are child and then when they are going to be adulthood. I think this is about the raising up, not we want to accept about the children when they become adulthood or just being a productive people. We want to raise them even at the very first time when they are still children, ladies and gentlemen. So that's why in under closing government is the only thing that's really clear. Even in the bad parents and even in the bad government, why it's still going to be better when we still have a bad government to take care of the children. But first of all, let's talk about the good parents itself. Under opposition side of the house, good parents is based on the emotional, right? Because they love the children, because the children love their parents. But this is not going to be something that realistic. For example, like children, mom, I want to be a doctor, and then the mom, because really love based on the emotional, yeah, you can be a doctor and so on and so forth. They not to be the realistic parents, because at the very first time they really love their children, right? And let's move to the bad parents that under status quo happen. Parents most of the time are not ready to have certain moment to be parents to fulfill children desire, right? First of all, when the children want to take their patient, for example, maybe he wants to be gamers, but parents are set up by certain influence of like a background and so on and so forth. For example, like culture tells the parents that gamers is not good for the children, or religion tells that this is not beneficial in religion and so on and so forth. That finally stop children to achieve these dreams. Parents feel like no more than the children, influenced by the culture or influenced by the standard social that this kind of parents want to follow, right? This is what makes us different with opening government. This decision is not giving the sustained responsibility in the future. How if the children finally not comfortable with the intervention of that parents, because he has a lot of environment that shape him finally by the development of environment in the end of the day. And government know more about that because they have data, because they have the general knowledge about the parents or about the children, because they have a professional in this case. Response to OO, parents are modern, and it's parent now is already progressive. I think even there are parents that still modern. It's in line to government that also modern. But second of all, how if parent is not that modern? So opening opposition cannot assume that all parents are that perfect, right? So how about the conservative parents or broken family that or etc. OO is not clear in this case. At least under closing government, we have a control at least to the children raising not to be conservative as the parents. Under opposition, you still let it become the conservative regeneration to the children itself. But second of all, later, bad government in our side, we assume that there is a possibility that government also is not that perfect, which is opening government never talk about this, and opening government never talk about how the bad government exists. Since this is becoming a program of the government have a people that have, first of all, government have the people that have capacity in parenting, right? They hire a professional in psychology that really understand about parents being a part of government to take over this kind of program, right? They have a lot of consideration to see what kind of emotional bonding to these children needs. Opposition say that this spatial emotional bonding only happens to the parents. I feel connected with my parents. I feel connected with my friends. I feel connected with my friends in university, for example. But I was not born by my friend itself. But I have an emotional bonding with this kind of friends. Means that emotional bonding itself is something that can be learned by this kind of professional, and it also can be achieved through the people that even we have not a blood inside of that kind of, for example, like parents under their side of the house. Even you have that's really special emotional bonding because you were born from that parents, means that a lot of problem happens in the family, means that emotional bonding is not something matters under our side of the house. But second of all, when government not running well in parenting, why it is still something that better under government side of the house before that? Yeah.
Yeah, your mechanism based on professional doesn't make sense because this professional also comes from society, and this means that the idea and stigma that exists in society will also be applied in the professional. And the fact that failing government like Zimbabwe and Venezuela doesn't able to manage their own country doesn't mean that they're able to make the children on your side better.
Okay, let me continue. When the government not running well in parenting, for example, why is still better under our side of the house? Comparatively, why there is no criticism under your side of the house? Because you're setting up under the religion, because you're setting up by the culture, and then there's no criticism to you, and you just let your children become what you want. Under our side of the house, when government not running well in this kind of program, first of all, they want to maintain the power, as my first speaker already told you, the power of political, for example, right? They will do a lot of evaluation when they think that this program is not working well, and that they will fix more and for the system of control, and they evaluate the professional why this kind of children cannot be paying attention by you. But last of all, unvalued children, for example, like opening opposition try to defend like a lot of unvalued children finally not get protected. First, there is always value that we can take as the children. They will maximize this kind of children even they unvalue. Why? Because there are a lot of criticism that coming from opposition party, for example, in that government, or criticism for society or from the children that finally think that our children is also valuable. So they will take care more disabled children because they think that this is going to be something that become a criticism from the society. So that's why government, even there is still bad action, there will be evaluation under our side of the house. Under parents or opposition side of the house, there is no criticism, and your children just keep on what the parents want to intervene. So that's why probably to propose.
Be advised, my speech may contain some kinds of like a harshest words. So yeah, and to mom, thank you for not giving me to government. Okay. Yeah. Test. Oh yeah. I cannot help. Thank you. Oh. Okay. Test. Audible? Okay. Let's agree that the whole debate wants to protect the children, but let's review about what actually the children interest and what actually the nation will try to interest with all these children. Understand that the nation interest is based on a result-oriented process.
and the children itself just want to be happy in the very first place. Meaning, when the moment when the government bench try to say they want to protect the children, meaning that they agree that they want to sacrifice the children of the interest of the children itself for the sake of the nation to begin with, and therefore they will not eventually protect the children at all. One point of response towards the government about the idea of emotional approachment that will eventually happen at their side. 3 responses. First, they agree that the choices made from emotional approach to children are valid and effective, meaning that they actually agree when we try to state that these kinds of affection actually play part when it comes to the performance of these children, when it comes to performance of the improving and the growth and etc. But at the same time, they want to diminish the self, therefore the argument about this want to fly in the first place. Second of all, at their best, emotional approachment happens through the psychiatrist from the professional help. As professionals, a psychiatrist can be their emotional approach will ignore a significant amount of individual uniqueness. Comparatively, parents cannot ignore their children's individual uniqueness because of the shared identity and contact and the constant exposure of interaction towards the surrounding, etc. Later. And third of all, at their worst, children will not feel affection at all. They will just be a means to an end and will eventually become a tools for this, for the nation, for the sake of in the interest of the nation itself. But let's take a bigger picture of their proposal itself. They offer a static method, like want it or not, children will be force-fed to follow the interest of the nation. And this will not eventually only cater the education of the children itself, but also the ideology, the liberty on what should these children follow and what not, because now they should obey on what the nation want them to be, and the way of life itself. And second of all, it will create the homogeneous environment in terms of giving these children to the government itself. It will limit the perception and the broad of bigger understanding. This will result in a limited fishes of understanding because these children are making these children alien to certain ground. Either it is left unexposed, or even if it does, government will only fit the negatives of these kinds of ideology. For example, oh, you should follow Pancasila, or maybe as a conservative country, you should not follow the LGBTQ community because it clashes with the interests of our nation itself. Their proposal will eventually affect the societal elements. For example, the biggest problem is they will gatekeep the potential voters. They will persuade actors who are affected by child rearing to only become the colony of national puppet. This will diminish the existence of opposition for the government, because at the end of the day, the opposition still leads those who actually not alien to these kinds of certain backgrounds and the voice itself. And second, even if it isn't, this will shift how parents will thinking that only by handling your children to the government that your children is going to success. This will create on 2 dangerous reasons of dangerous. First, it will disincentivize the parents' responsibility. This will create a thinking of parents will think, okay, I'll keep making babies anyway because at the end of the day, the government will handle it by myself, so I don't have any responsibility towards this. This will create a thinking. This will create a mindset towards the society that parents is not mere than a human factory, but before that, yeah. CG.
If government really bad on your side of the house, even under parents you cannot do anything. Exactly why better under government, because at least government ensure your basic needs, right?
Okay, but that doesn't answer on what actually fueled these people to performance to begin with. On your side, you only stated that we will provide the curriculum for this and etc. etc. But the moment that you say that these children are actually meant to be sacrificed when it comes to the way of happiness, when it comes under the affections that will eventually fuel the reasoning behind their improvement itself, is the moment that you're not protecting the children at all. 2 points of clashes. First, which sides actually creates a better end goals? Which sides actually creates a better version of themselves? And second is, which sides protect the interests of both nations and the children itself? Let's take a look at the fuel of the improvement itself. 2 reasons. First, under the idea of affections. Why should affection play a role? Because first, it creates a better relationship that will leads to a cooperations. Meaning that if you are trying to connect with people, if you try to provide affection and in these states, you and your parents, this will create a better understanding and cooperation. You understand that, oh yeah, your parents are having a hard times right now. Therefore, this will, if this eventually keep habituated, this will come to types of reconciliation towards your economical problem with a better cooperation. And second of all, This will eventually to provide a better incentive for these children to help at the end of the day. Because by the idea of that you raised me, therefore I should help you. You already raised me properly, even though we're going to the poor environment, but you already provide me with an excellent love, etc., etc. Therefore, it is my duty to reachieve and readjust out of faith, and therefore I will help you. I will help you eventually. But second of all, under the idea of surroundings itself, notice, even if the let's say the affection doesn't exist under one family, etc., etc., children will eventually find them under separate points. Like first, there's still those who share the same suffering, and therefore this will create a bit let's say a sense of sharing a same suffering, and at the very least, at our size, the children won't battle the differences because we're not gatekept by this kind of information. But look at how the children are exposed to diversified field under our side. We create a better adaptive behavior because we're not going to be set by the limits or the interests of the nation, meaning that we are better at adaptive. We're not going to be aggressive at some kinds of differentiation, for examples. Their sides only glorified that the child will eventually mold it to become the best version. But what actually incentivizes these children to begin with? What is the fuel? What is the reason? Just because children does not understand about the future fate of your parents, and all of that. For example, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Second, which sides protects the interests of both nations and the children? At the government side, they diminish the meaning of life for nations' interests. This will eventually create the radicals for the size of the government itself. And even if it doesn't, it limits the sympathetical scope for these children to begin with, because they battle the differences rather than embrace it. And on our side, we already told you, we have emotional attachment and the prerequisite towards the improvement itself. Therefore, the affections at childhood affects the performance at life, because the children understand that the blood is thicker than water. Therefore, the family is what actually the true reason for you to improve in the very first place. But let's talk about the degree of happiness. At their side, there is the degree of happiness like in process. It is the children are sacrificed, and the results are long term. But under our side, we accompany these children emotionally, therefore provide a better understanding towards the emotional, the sympathetical scope, and so on, etc. And even if the happiness comes in short term, but we do that continuously, therefore it stabilizes the children. Thank you.